Hello everyone, welcome to PCD Vinyl World. Today I wanted to do a video because I haven't done one in a while, so I figured I'd get back and rank the albums of Ted Nugent. Um, I know he's not the most popular guy on the vinyl community. I mean, they're all they all think Ted's ridiculously, right wing crazy person, but um, in actuality, none of his music really uh, has any political leanings, left or right. I would say, I guess maybe it's more right just because it's more about freedom and everything. But, you know, in my opinion, if you don't like Ted Nugent, you don't really like rock and roll. You're just judging him based on what he's coming out with the last 20 or so years politically, maybe even longer than that. But anyway, like the title suggests, I'm only doing the epic Atlantic years, simply because after I'm including the first Atlantic album he did, Spirit of the Wild, because that's sort of like the one where he becomes sort of Ted Nugent, almost like the caricature of himself. So I figured I would stop there because a lot of those albums, it's starting to sound the same over and over. Even some of these, it's hard to distinguish some of them between all the songs and everything. But overall, I would say his best album is Double Live Gonzo. So if you're a casual fan, you should probably pick this up. Even though there's not anything from Free For All on here, believe it or not. But yeah, this is one of the great 70s live albums. I'm also going to include, when I do the ranking, the last Amboy Dukes album, Tooth, Fang, and Claw, because it's basically almost like the first Ted Nugent album, except it doesn't have Derek St. Holmes on it. What else? All right, so yeah, in case you didn't know, Ted was in a band called the Amboy Dukes and eventually became Ted Nugent's Amboy Dukes. They had, I believe, 7 albums or 6 or 7 albums, sort of that proto hard rock metal out of Detroit. But eventually it was, I guess, it was determined he was the star, so he sort of went solo. But the reason why it's kind of odd that he's forgotten is because in the 70s, when you talk about American hard rock and metal bands, there was really, besides Kiss, Aerosmith, Blue Oyster Cult, Alice Cooper, there really was nobody except Ted Nugent. And a lot of people are like, oh, wasn't he like a one-hit wonder, Cat Scratch Fever or whatever? But he had 5 platinum and 8 gold albums in a row. So I don't think that's really considered a one-hit wonder. I mean, hard rock metal bands usually don't have legitimate hits to begin with, so anyway, let's start the ranking here. So coming in at the bottom, I didn't even count how many we're going to include here, but his 1985 album, Little Miss Dangerous. So this one is very, very 80s sounding. The drums sound ridiculously bad. If I didn't mention it, Ted always usually has another rhythm guitar player that sings with him. Originally it was Derek St. Holmes, then Charlie Hune. Actually on here, Dave Amato joined the band. He did 2 albums with him. He's best known as REO Speedwagon's lead guitar player from the past 30 plus years. But he actually played and sang with Ted on this album. And the next one, High Heels in Motion's pretty good rocker, but it's not a Nugent song. It's just sounds like a regular hair metal song. Little Miss Dangerous is okay. Crazy Ladies is okay. Final song, Painkiller, is okay. The rest of it is just, I mean, this is almost like a caricature of hair metal. It's so bad. There's not even a lot of like great solos on here. And a lot of people complain about some of the 80s albums like Crazy Nights from Kiss. I mean, this makes Crazy Nights from Kiss sound like Master of Puppets as far as like production and all of that. And a lot of people like slag on a lot of 70s artists for their 80s albums. But, they didn't have the foresight to see that sometime in the 90s, people were going to say, hey, you should get back to your original sound. These artists just thought modern sound was just going to keep getting more and more modern and going on, and they just went with it. They didn't, if they had known that it was going to be a trend starting in the 90s for bands to get back to their original 70s sound, they probably would have never went in this direction. So you have to sort of take this stuff with a grain of salt. But to me, that's definitely his worst album. Next up is the follow-up to that, 1988's If You Can't Lick 'Em, Lick 'Em. Again, this has Dave Amato, but I believe this is the first album where Nugent sings all the songs himself. It's a little bit better as far as production. The drums aren't as bad. The guitars are a little more not processed, 70s sounding. I would say there's 2 or 3 good songs on each side. Actually, there's a song that it ends with, That's the Story of Love, that was written by John Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora. Mr. Woke Jovi now would probably never admit that he even knows Ted Nugent, but yeah, he actually wrote that. I think there was a video on MTV I vaguely remember seeing. But at this point in the 80s, and I'll mention it with some of the other albums, he comes up with these crazy song titles that are just sort of, double meanings and this and that, and doesn't have the hooks or anything to back them up. The harder they come, the harder I get. Separate the men from the boys. Bite down hard. I mean, all of these cliched, sexual song titles. Spread Your Wings is this weird ballad on here, kind of creepy when you listen to it, but it's not so bad. But yeah, it's still pretty bad. Coming up next, and I think all of these going forward are actually pretty good in their own right compared to those two. I'm not ranking any of the ones in the past 20 or so years, so I think those are definitely the worst too. But this is the 82 Nugent album. So this one, St. Holmes came back on, actually. And he's got Carmine Appice on drums. But man, the production is really weak. It's almost like some of these songs sound like they could be like adult contemporary. There's just no power and balls. And Ted was always known for having that raw, in-your-face guitar sound. And this is just so subdued production-wise. That being said, the Derek St. Holmes songs on here are pretty good, but they're almost like they sound like they're from another album. I'm surprised that actually after this album he wasn't offered a solo deal or something, because his songs are actually pretty good. I think some of them could have been hits. But as far as the Nugent songs, No, 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 Bound and Gagged, they're okay. I mean, it's not a bad album. Tail Gunner's a pretty good song that ends the album. But you would have thought, coming back, he would have been like a much more harder, aggressive album. This is also where they start doing this Nugent thing, this sort of logo that they keep putting everywhere. I guess they started that on Atlantic when he started doing that. Next up is actually a live album with all new songs called Intensities in 10 Cities. So he went and recorded 10 songs in 10 different cities, brand new songs. And they're all pretty good, but they're just nothing killer. Again, this is sort of like where he's beginning to just come up with cliched song titles. It does sound pretty good. I think Charlie Hune only sings one song on here, maybe. The rest of it's Ted. The big hit on here was sort of like the remake of A Land of a Thousand Dances, that song from the 50s or whatever. Put Up or Shut Up, Spontaneous Combustion, they're pretty good. What's the other one? This also has some of his song titles that were sort of getting attention at the time. Jailbait, I'm a Predator. I don't know why he just didn't take the tracks and clean them up and make it a studio album, because you really can't tell it's live besides the audience track. But this is sort of the last gasp. I think this is 1981. Yeah, I think this is the last one that really sounds anything like classic Ted Nugent. From here on, it sort of has like a 80s or modern sound, but this is the last one. Coming up next from, is this 84? Penetrator. So this one has Brian Howe on vocals, who later went on to replace Paul Rodgers in Bad Company, had a bunch of hits with them in the late 80s, early 90s, and a lot of the songs on here sort of have that feel. This is much better, heavier than the 82 Nugent album. There's still some cheesy keyboards and stuff on here, but Tied Up in Love, the opening track, is probably one of his best tracks of the 80s, I think. He sings a couple songs on here. I think Take Me Home, Thunder Thighs. But the rest of them are all pretty good. Also, Todd Howarth, who later sang with Frehley's Comet, sings background on this. But it's funny. I remember buying this sometime in the late 80s in a cutout bin. And I'm like, oh, Ted Nugent. I think this is the first album without him on the cover either. I mean, I don't remember this album getting any attention or press when it came out. I don't think they made a video for it. But it's actually pretty decent. Next up there, 1995 release Spirit of the Wild. And this is the last one I'm ranking with this batch. Simply because Derek St. Holmes is back on here. And sort of his comeback after having the Damn Yankees. If you don't remember, Ted was in Damn Yankees. They made 2 albums. And this is sort of the rebirth of his career. And he's got a real ferocious guitar sound, which all of his newer albums do. And has some of his more well-known songs, I would say, at least the only well-known songs I think he's made since the 80s or 90s on. Fred Bear, Kiss My Ass, Spirit of the Wild, the title track, and he also titled the song Tooth, Fang, and Claw, which was not on Tooth, Fang, and Claw, but overall this is pretty good. Again, just like the 82 Nugent album, the Derek St. Holmes songs on here are good, but they sound like they're from another album, and like they don't flow cohesively. So it's kind of strange that way. Coming up next, State of Shock. So, I believe the second one with Charlie Huhn on vocals and guitar. Big hit on here was Paralyzed. Snake Charmer, State of Shock was a pretty good song. But again, you're starting to get into an era where like a lot of these songs you can't even distinguish the openings because they're all these open A bluesy guitar riffs, you know. So, but overall, these are all good listens, but they just all have a few standout tracks. Same with Weekend Warriors, the first one with Charlie Huhn. Need You Bad's the opening track. That's probably the best Charlie Huhn song, I think, out of that 4-album stretch that he was on. Good Friends in a Bottle of Wine, Venom Soup, Pick Your Poison, Smokescreen, Tight Spots, Weekend Warriors. Anyone ever noticed that, like, on all the albums, none of the songs, I'm talking about the Epic albums, none of the songs are in the order that they are. Like, so it's really annoying when you listen to these and like, it's not even on the inner sleeve, they're not in the correct order. It's just, I found this odd, and it's all of his albums. So, coming up next, Stream Dream. This one had a pretty big, well-known song, Wango Tango. Scream Dream's a pretty good song as well, Hard as Nails. Flesh and Blood is a really good song, but he does this weird, like, distorted mic effect on it, which ruins the song for me. But if you look on YouTube, there's a video of him playing it, like, around 1980, 81, and it's much better than this. But yeah, this is pretty good as well. Nothing special. Coming up next, what we got? The top 4 here. Coming in at number 4, Cat Scratch Fever. I don't think this is as strong as everyone else thinks. Cat Scratch Fever is good. Wang Dang Sweet Poontang. Homebound, I think, is a really good instrumental. But overall, it's kind of a weaker album. Kind of reminds me of Agents of Fortune from Blue Oyster Cult. It has their biggest song, Don't Fear the Reaper, but the rest of the album is just kind of okay. That's what this one is for me. Derek St. Holmes is on here, but, you know, he's kind of, this is the last one he did before he came back. He's been in and out of the band, you know. Coming in at third place, I think, is Tooth, Fang, and Claw. Like I said, this is the last one from the Amboy Dukes. But basically, it is like a Nugent Band album. Just doesn't have Derek St. Holmes on it. Great White Buffalo is one of his best known songs, and that's on here along with Hibernation, an instrumental. In fact, on the Double Live Gonzo album, those two songs take up a whole side of the record. But this is loud, in your face, Detroit rock and roll. Ironically, he's, for the Amboy Dukes, I think their last two albums was on the Zappa label, Discreet. You can't find two guys that are more on the opposite spectrum politically, I guess. Although, who knows what Frank would think now, the way, like, the left is with the censorship thing. But, you know, this is a good album. If you can seek this out along with the one before this, to me they're the best of the Amboy Dukes albums. Coming up next, Free For All, another solid album. So on this one, Derek St. Holmes left in the middle of recording. I guess there was some kind of dispute, and he had Meatloaf come in and sing 4 songs on here. And I have to say that those 4 songs are kind of like some of the heaviest stuff that Ted ever did. They're more metal than, say, the rest of his stuff. Maybe it's just the way Meatloaf sang them or whatever. Street Rats, Hammer Down, Writing on the Wall. So, yeah, this is definitely good. It's also got Dog Eat Dog, which I think is the only Derek St. Holmes song on here. Pretty good. Of course, Free For All. But that's a great one. And finally, his solo debut, Ted Nugent. This one's got probably his biggest song, Stranglehold, Stormtrooper and Hey Baby, Just What the Doctor Ordered, which is my favorite Ted Nugent song, Snakeskin Cowboys. Almost every song on here is a well-known or hit. I would say 7 out of the 9 tracks. So that's definitely a great one. The thing about these is he never really had great production. Even on his later 70s albums where they could afford it, he just never, always sounded kind of flat, you know, which is why I tend to go with the live album or even Tooth, Fang, and Claw, you know, just because to me they sound the best. Or, to be honest with you, once he gets to the 90s, he really gets that loud, in-your-face guitar, like you would think, you know, Ted has with he started using the Eddie Van Halen amps, I think, in the 90s or with Damn Yankees, and he continued that. So the Damn Yankees albums, too, if you want to check those out, those are pretty good. And other than that, you know, give him a chance. Don't just listen to his political rants or this and that, even though they are kind of funny, too. But anyway, if you like these videos, please subscribe and give me your top 5 Nugent or just rank them for me. Like these videos, please subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.